Felone, and well, in this presentation, I would like to talk about what I call the paganization of Christianity or Christianism. I will focus mainly on two Spanish experimental doom metal bands, Orthodox and El Altar del Holocausto. First of all, I noticed that the last letter from the title of my presentation was missing, so sorry for that. I didn't notice when I checked the program. But, well, I think there's a problem. No. Okay. I don't know where it is. Okay. First of all, I'd like to start talking about the metal. I think most of you know what the metal is, of course. The slow, loud, the first kind of heavy metal that was developed by bands like Sabbath and other bands. Well, there have been a lot of waves of the metal, but most of them share one common trait that was clearly noticed by Jonathan Piper, that is that the power associated to metal tends to be reversed. Other kinds of metal tend to be more related with empowerment. This is simplistic, I know, but it's useful. Other kinds of metal tend to be related with empowerment. The metal is more related to disempowerment. We can even make an analogy and say that doom metal is more masochist and other kinds of metal tend to be more sadistic. It's quite simplistic and reductionist, but it could be true. I think we have to keep this in mind to understand better any doom metal band, and we have to also keep this in mind in order to understand better how metal uses religion. Okay, I know. The first idea I'd like to draw your attention to is the one by Jason Leaf in his book about Christianity and metal. That is, the metal is quite related to the impure sacred. The impure sacred is a category coined by Durkheim, which is related to those dark, untamable forces of death and violence that disrupt and fragment identity. They are not exclusive of any religious belief, but Leaf focuses attention in Christianity. For instance, in Christianity, a great example of the impure is the killing of Jesus Christ. It was noted by authors like Métal as one of the greatest incarnation of the evil in Christian religion. Okay. So when metal tries to recover all those impure elements, it tries to recover also a certain kind of relationship that existed between art and religious festival. This is an idea coined by Gadama, which refers to the way we aesthetically perceive art. It's not that he says that we perceive art in a similar way. We aesthetically perceive art in a similar way that we perceive time and space and social relationships within the religious festival. The problem is that nowadays there's a clear exit to the profane. There's a clear exit to the profanum, to what is beyond the fanum, the temple of the religion. That doesn't mean that art nowadays is more or less religious. It means that our perception is less religious. We are unable to deepen, and this is something that has been noticed by authors like Byung-Chul Han. So when metal tries to recover all those impure sacred elements, all those complex religious and transgressive elements, it tries to force an altered perception of time within the public. But we also have to view quite critically these ideas, because there's always some kind of problematic around primitivism and the return to Asian religions or other times elements, and this is quite well said by Eloy Fernandez Porta with his concept of the urpop. For him, the urpop are all those primitive elements that appears in ultramodern contexts. It's quite different from the postmodern primitivism in that it's not an ironic pastiche, it's something more serious, but at the same time it's quite problematic, because like the Ur text, there's always an accessible original. And this problematic, could be conscious or unconsciously embraced by the bands. For instance, Fernando Porta speaks about drum metal and Norwegian black metal with this concept in mind. And sometimes the reference to an inaccessible original is conscious, and sometimes it's unconscious. So we have to keep in mind all those ideas in order to understand better things. Things like this. This is an excerpt from a song by the Spanish Andalusian band Orthodox called Arrodíllate ante la madera y la piedra, which could be translated as bow down to wood and stone, being wood and stone clear symbols of the Christian Church. As you can see, it's a description of the Holy Communion, and it's a quite negative description. The sacrament is turned into an act of submission to God, into an act in which we are forced to eat His flesh and drink His blood. This is something that the band has highlighted in their interviews. They said that today Satan is an almost positive figure. It's like a rock star is someone cool, but God is still quite frightening. God is still menacing, almighty, and they are more interested in God as a source of disempowerment than in Satan. And this is quite clearly highlighted by the musical setting of this song. Let's hear a little bit. As you may notice, the slow, monotonous tempo, the almost psalmodic way of singing, the church, the bell-like clean guitar strumming, all contribute to the setting of an oppressive church, and we are forced to do the sacrament. Well, this is a quite common way of depicting God in doom metal, but that's not why Orthodox gain authority. They gain authority for things like this. This a little bit dark, but well, they are playing at a flamenco festival with a bailaor, Israel band, and they are wearing Nazareno costumes. The Nazarenos or Nazarene are the typical way of dressing related to the Spanish Holy Week. Well, for Holy Week, people in Spain tend to dress like that. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about the clown. And they carry the wooden sculpture of Christ, the Virgin Mary, or any other events related to the last days of Christ. And well, they sometimes wear this pointed hat, but sometimes they do not wear hat at all. They wear only the fabric covering their heads. That's the way Orthodox use this costume. But Orthodox is not only interested in this way of the visual aspects of the Holy Week. It's also interested in the musical ones, like for instance the processional marches, and also what we call saetas or arrows. The saetas are a cappella, melismatic chant, which is usually thrown like an arrow from a balcony to the figure of Christ or any icon. They are typical from southern Spain, from Andalusia. They are not typical from other parts of Spain, and they introduce them in their music. Here we're gonna hear two examples. The first one is from the introduction to the third album, which is called Marcha de la Santa Sangre, March of the Saint Blood. Well, it's their take on the processional marches. You will hear something that is not so different from a Morricone Western. It's quite interesting to notice the similarities between all those elements. The other song I like to play is called. Where's the mouse? Okay, I don't know what it is. The other song I like to play is called Solemn Triduum, Solemn Triduum, which refers to the 3 most sacred days of the Holy Week. And I'm going to play an edited version because the song starts with a clear reference to the drum rolls of the processional marches, but it also has some melismatic, Phrygian singing, which is clearly influenced by the saetas. Let's hear a little bit of this song. With the 3 examples I've played, I think it will be better understood why the band delivered what I call the paganization of Christianity. Because they put a great emphasis on the Holy Week and the most impure aspects of the Andalusian popular religiosity, trying to connect them with the pagan past of the Mediterranean. Here there's an opposition between paganism and Christianity, because here in Spain, Christianity is rooted in paganism, and that is clearly clear for them. So they try to draw connections between Christianity and, for instance, Greek religions, Phoenician religions, even the megalithic past of Andalusia. And this is parallel at the musical level with a mix of drum, doom metal, and certain avant-garde movements. For instance, free jazz. Nowadays, the band are playing mostly free improvisation. They're not playing doom metal anymore. But well, they even have a song that is titled after a piece by Ligeti, so they are quite aware of those influences. Of course, they put a great emphasis on the local elements, with musical allusions to different musics related to Andalusia, and of course certain symbols. The Nazareno costume, but also the use of certain symbols like the bull. The bull is an animal that is clearly related to Spain, but it's also one of the symbols of the god Baal, and Orthodox dedicate one album to this god, and also is present, for instance, in the Minoic cults of Crete. And they are quite aware of this connection, and they try to connect present Christianity, present impure popular Christianity, with the pagan past of the Mediterranean, doing this paganization of Christianity. It's interesting to compare this band with a more modern band, less experimental, also from Spain, called El Altar del Holocausto, the Altar of the Holocaust. It's a band from Salamanca in North Castilla, and they blend instrumental post-rock with doom metal. It's a more cosmopolitan style. in which they introduce certain local elements. For instance, the way they dress is a customized version of the way Nazareno dressed for the Holy Week. And also, there are certain allusions, for instance, to processional marches. They unironically worship the Christian God, and I quote unquote unironical because it's quite clear that they are not totally serious about it. They state in all of their interviews that, well, they play music to worship God, but they always highlighting the most impure, the most obscure elements of Christianity. This is clearly visible in the music, for instance, in which maybe the post-rock parts could be seen as an allusion to the light and purity of Christianity. I have doubts about it. But of course, the metal parts, the distorted, chromatic, heavy riffs, are clear allusions to the most impure, most almost pagan elements of the Christian faith. And this is something quite visible in their music videos. Here we have a music video that they, for a song released this year, early this year, in which it's clear that the way in which they see God is quite similar to the way in which Orthodox conceives God. It's always a disempowering force. They're always highlighting the beautiful feelings like suffering, submission, despair, angst, and so on. And the way in which they act in this music video is quite clear to the way in which they conceive the Christian God and how we need to behave in order to please Him. It's from the Bible. To the conclusions. To wrap up, I'd like to highlight that both bands use certain logics from the religious festival. They are quite the way they dress, the way they conceive God, the way they turn some of their concepts into some kind of liturgy. It's quite related to this idea of returning to the perception of time of the festival, of the religious festival. But they are quite aware of the inaccessibility of the originals. They try to problematize what it means to talk about God, to talk about Christianity in modern secular Spain. Because after all, there are the metal bands which are interested in this empowerment, and they focus on the figure of God to do that. And they focus, following what Leaf has said about Christianity and metal, they focus on the most impure aspects of this religion. And with that, they reflect the complex relationship that exists between metal and Christianity. We are not always talking about Satanism. We are not always talking about a clear over anti-Christianism. Sometimes these decisions are rooted in aesthetical choice, in a certain social critique, and we have to analyze deeply any one of these cases to understand better how they work. So I will be pleased to hear from you any other examples that deliver similar ways, similar views, similar religious views, or which differs completely from that. Thank you for your attention. Well, that brings me to the end of my presentation.